The Remains of Reindeer by Monica Lee. The noon of the early October day of 1970 hung in the translucent atmosphere like a single, enormous tear. Fernhill Manor, a large building of Cotswold stone with clusters of tall brick chimneys, stood silently, as if waiting for the October tear to fall. Set in 200 acres of woodland deep in Hampshire, with small lakes and rare, weeping trees, semi-wild gardens and beautifully designed topiary, the house was enveloped in a carefully acquired aloneness. The naked branches of climbing roses wreathed the tall window in the south wing, behind which Melissa Weldon was dying. She was 55 years old and was being rapidly swept away by leukemia. The bedroom was the almost macabre result of her lifelong obsession with white. The floor was covered in a deep pile white velvet, the walls coated with white damask. The bed, a swan-like creation of quilted white satin, had clusters of white chiffon roses suspended on silver chains, floating close to the ceiling. Identical roses formed the shade of the bedside lamp. Melissa was lost in waves of heavily embroidered pillows. Only her nose, thin, yellow, and already sharpened by approaching death, was visible, and her hands, her cherished, celebrated, adored, beautiful hands, placed on the coverlet, palms down, the fingers slightly apart, wrists circled in layers of white gossamer lace. Her brother Hubert sat in an armchair close to the bed. He was 65 and had spent all his life, with a few brief interludes, first with his parents and Melissa, and after their mutual death in an air crash 20 years ago, with Melissa at Fernhill Manor. In the quietness of the death room, he went back almost 40 years. Back to Melissa's 15th birthday. He was 25 and had just returned with a group of Cambridge University students from a midnight sun expedition to Lapland. He was positively enthralled with the primitive yet majestic scenery of that faraway north, fascinated by the ultimate power of the reindeer over the life of the Lapps. The reindeer was everything: food, clothing, bedsheets, transport, light. He will forever remember two old Lapp women nursing an injured reindeer with the utmost tenderness. And next day, the same two old women caught another reindeer in a lasso, killed him with a few primitive tools, skinned and completely dismembered him in less than 3 hours. Nothing was wasted. The head was carefully cut off with the antlers, for the ever-increasing number of souvenir hunters. The hide was hung up to dry for clothes and sheets, the entrails thrown in the river to feed the fish, the chunks of meat prepared for smoking, the sinews wound on thick branches as sewing thread. Finally, the bones were crushed between stones and mixed with earth to ensure the harvest of grass. Hubert Weldon was remembering the long article entitled "The Remains of Reindeer" he wrote for the university magazine, when the old family doctor, Jason Forbes, entered the room. He carried a much larger black bag than usual and a bottle of brandy and 2 glasses. "We'll need it," he said, pouring the brandy. "This room makes me feel as if I am buried in a snow avalanche." He handed the glass over Melissa's bed to Hubert and settled in the armchair on the other side. He drank the brandy in one gulp. Hubert sipped his drink very slowly, wondering why the old physician was so nervy. The doctor poured himself another glass and sank deeply into the velvet of the chair. Hubert went back to Melissa's birthday. Until that day he was not much at home and hardly knew his sister. He gave her the proper presents on certain occasions and had tea with her on his rare visits home. He hated photographs, and there were none in his university rooms. The day before the birthday celebration, his mother asked him to her boudoir. "It is time, Hubert, that you took some notice of your sister," she said. Hubert wanted to know why. "She is very rich and very ugly," his mother said with the coldest objectivity. "Until now we have managed to keep it from her. There were no mirrors in the nursery or any of the rooms she was likely to enter. There were no children around at all. She had no chance to notice that her face was long and thin, her nose almost like a beak, her shoulders visibly hunched. The governess was most understanding." The old doctor took another drink and lifted one of the butterfly-like hands to feel Melissa's pulse. After a minute he looked at Hubert and said, Another hour, perhaps. It was uncanny, but Hubert Weldon did not leave his train of thoughts. He was right back in his mother's boudoir, hearing himself saying, "What do you want me to do?" He remembered his mother's face, pink and doll-like, framed with honey-colored, fluffy hair. "You will have to protect her from now on." Apparently his mother had a premonition, Hubert Weldon thought, as he watched Melissa's face sinking deeper and deeper in coma. The boys and girls invited to that birthday party were all children of parents who were in some way dependent on Melissa's rich father. Obviously, they were told to adore her and celebrate with her. Everything went extremely well until the moment came for cutting the enormous cake, shaped like a basket of flowers. The ginger-haired and freckled son of Mr. Weldon's business associate seemed to have had enough of the white chiffon-clad Melissa. As she cut the cake with the help of her brother, the freckled Tony shouted, "You are an ugly duckling. We must play with you because your father's got all the money." Even now, 40 years later, Hubert Weldon remembered the icy silence in the vast drawing room. Everything after that was just cold legal arrangements. Mr. and Mrs. Weldon set up a huge trust from their mutual estates. According to the trust, Melissa got 2/3 and Hubert 1/3, providing that he abandoned his Cambridge University studies and came to live at Fernhill Manor for good. Should Melissa die before him, the trust would break up and all the money and estate would go to Hubert. The doctor went out of the room. Hubert Weldon leaned over, close to Melissa's face. The sickly odor of death rose from the well of the pillows. Slowly, he touched his sister's hands, and that brought him back to that disastrous birthday party. To compensate Melissa for the freckled boy's rudeness, her parents took her to a top Mayfair jeweler to choose a ring or a bracelet. The old man in the establishment was absolutely smitten by the beauty of the young girl's hands. She chose a large sapphire ring with a cluster of rubies, and while the check was written out, the old man asked Melissa if she would agree to have her hands photographed, with the ring of course, and have it displayed in the firm's window. Melissa was delighted, and the cult of her hands was born. Hubert remembered vividly the long years of ecstasy and adoration. A resident manicurist was employed, with expert knowledge of herbal oils and essences, and also a precise massage technique. Once a week, Dr. Jason Forbes, then a young practitioner, called to examine Melissa's hands, finger after finger, nail after nail, vein after vein. As time progressed, his sister's hands were photographed and even sculptured, with engagement rings, wedding rings, dress rings, mourning rings, bracelets and wrist watches. A stunted, pale-faced orphan girl was engaged to paste all the advertisement cuttings in large, white satin-bound albums. Melissa did not accept money. The parents thought that vulgar. Instead, she was presented with jewelry, and her collection grew in number and value. Dr. Forbes re-entered the room carrying a full bottle of brandy. "I do need one," Hubert Weldon said. The doctor poured 2 large glasses and handed one to Hubert. The early afternoon drifted behind the window. About half an hour to go, the doctor observed. But at that moment, Hubert was back in the late 30s, when his mother suggested that it was time to find Melissa a husband. Hubert was appointed the chief hunter. He went ahead of the family to Paris, Deauville, Biarritz, Monte Carlo, and St. Moritz and Gstaad in the winter. He rounded up a few promising young men in the prominent bars and clubs. Meanwhile, an elderly, clever dressmaker was engaged to dress Melissa. It was a problem. The 30s were the years of extremely chic fashions, slinky dresses, long beads and pearls, headbands with the swish of birds of paradise, sables and foxes draped in dramatic shapes. The dressmaker knew the answers. We must concentrate on her hands. The rest must be veiled over. And she created plain dresses, mostly in white, floating fabrics with the accent on the sleeves, from which the celebrated hands emerged like jeweled doves. When Melissa arrived with parents and servants in trunks, Hubert's acquaintances were invited to opulent luncheons and chandelier dances at the top hotels of the resorts. Those who were new to the international market politely excused themselves from the next invitation. The seasoned travelers on the social circuit jumped eagerly at the chance to marry the rich, ugly girl with the hands. But as their intentions were so obvious, they were coldly eliminated. In 1944, the Weldons had had enough. On the terrace of the famous Les Ambassadeurs in Deauville, they decided, over cocktails, to go home the next day. And just then, Hubert recalled, watching Melissa's hands sinking in the coverlet, a young man entered the terrace. He was tall and lean, his tanned skin fresh and healthy, his auburn hair well-groomed. He came straight to the Weldons' table. He bowed. "My name is Henry Iwitz. May I paint the famous hands?" Hubert remembered asking curtly, "How do you know whose hands they are?" Henry Iwitz smiled, in the same way one remembers the smile of the Mona Lisa. Next morning, Melissa's hands were painted by Henry, without rings or bracelets, just suspended in the air against the backdrop of the blue sea. The story of his life was starkly simple. He was 26 years old. His mother was a beautiful Creole who ran away from a dilapidated New Orleans mansion to Paris. His father was a mixture of French and English. He went through many occupations, from the skipper of a sand barge on the Seine to a dresser in funeral parlors. It was when he was 16 that Henry left home. He could not stand the distinct smell of death his father brought with him every evening. He became a houseboy to a famous commercial artist, and his talent for painting developed under his guidance. In the past 5 years, he had lived all over Europe, painting for his dinners. Hubert remembered Melissa's ecstasy about Henry's painting of her hands. Next day, he traveled with the Weldons for his long stay at Fernhill Manor. Dr. Forbes interrupted Hubert's wonderings. He felt Melissa's pulse again and said quietly, "Only minutes now." But it was time enough for Hubert to recall the first 3 years of Henry's residence at the house. A large room on the ground floor was allocated as Henry's studio. Hubert was asked to go to London with Henry for a few days to buy easels, paints, brushes, frames, and anything the young man may need for the approaching winter. The sessions went on in the studio, the grounds at the lake, the summer house, the orangery, the topiary. Strange, haunting pictures were hung in the galleried hall, the blue drawing room and Melissa's own boudoir. Melissa's hands with roses, butterflies, drifting lace handkerchiefs, silver baskets, pale green apples. Henry Iwitz developed a remarkable technique of letting Melissa's face and shoulders recede into a misty background. He went to London with her for all her photographic sessions, and the Bond Street jewelers commissioned him to paint the hands with their rings and bracelets. Hubert thought of the many times he had hoped to return to Lapland, but his mother always reminded him of his duty to his rather delicate sister. "You must watch him, Hubert. Don't forget his mixed background." And the midnight sun remained distant and fading. Dr. Forbes poured himself another brandy. "Miscalculated the timing," he said gruffly. But Hubert Weldon continued his travels in the past. He recalled Melissa's rage at Henry's indifference towards her. "I am 32 now, Hubert, and still a virgin. If I can't have him in the ordinary way, you must buy him for me." Hubert consulted his mother. Even now he felt the cold astonishment at her answer. "Buy him in marriage. He is the only one in the running. At least he is clean and healthy. Make the offer big." But Henry was too much of a bohemian to agree to that. Also, he was extremely generously paid by Mr. Weldon, and his bank account grew like plants in a lush greenhouse. "I will sleep with her," he told Hubert, as a sort of perpetual Christmas stocking. "But I must feel free to leave without scenes, tantrums, threats." After a long conference, the Weldons agreed. There was a great chance that he might like her after all, and it was obvious that the security of Fernhill Manor was very important to him. Melissa's head moved slightly to one side. Dr. Forbes grabbed her pulse. "Only 30 beats in a minute. Her heart has not given up yet." Hubert felt that he should not be thinking about all that just at this moment, but his thoughts ran away like a mountain river in storm. For almost 2 years, Melissa had established a separate life with Henry. There was no room to hang up more of Henry's paintings of her hands. He took up landscapes and explored the wild scenery of the Fernhill Manor woodlands. His apartment was full of unframed canvases. He spent regular hours in Melissa's bedroom after dinner, as regular as his coffee and brandy, nothing less but also nothing more. Just before Christmas of 1949, he went to Mr. Weldon's study. "I hope that you remember our agreement, sir. I am leaving in 1 hour's time. For good." A removal van called shortly afterwards. Almost 90 canvases were loaded in. Melissa was still asleep in her large, white satin bed when Henry Iwitz climbed in the cabin next to the driver. For months she did not speak, did not leave her rooms, only ate white bread, and drank a few cups of coffee. For hours she sat close to the tropical fish tank in her boudoir, watching the sleepy movements of the shoals of brilliant, miniature exotic fish. A year later, he remembered, his mother and father went away for a few weeks in Italy. That ended in a brief telephone call from the airport that they had died in a crash over the Alps. That was 20 years ago. 20 years of ever-growing devotion to his emotionally mutilated sister. A devotion which almost reached the dimensions of an obsession. The faint sound of Melissa's breathing stopped. Dr. Forbes was holding one of her wrists and nodded to Hubert to take the other. Together they witnessed the end of Melissa Weldon's life. Hubert went to the window and drew the drapes of the white silk curtains together. "Hubert, go and tell the servants. I will wait for you in your sister's boudoir. We must talk." As Hubert went down the heavy, carved staircase, lined with the pictures of Melissa's hands, the servants stood still in the vast, galleried hall. In the proper order of the servants' protocol, the butler, the housekeeper, the lady's maid, the cook, the 2 housemaids, the kitchen maid. The resident manicurist stood apart as she had no rightful place in the household lineup. "My sister died a few minutes ago. You will be told about the funeral later. As for now, I wish to say that the household will go on without any change at all." The butler bowed, and the rest of the line bowed like chrysanthemum in the wind. As he entered Melissa's boudoir, Hubert was aware of the strange change in the atmosphere of that beautiful room. Dr. Forbes sat close to the window, the black bag at his feet. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the October air was bright and frosty. The fish tank, Hubert thought suddenly, the tropical fish tank was dark and motionless. "The tank," he cried. "Yes, the tank," Dr. Forbes said. "I switched off the heating system early this morning when I was sure that Melissa would not live past the late afternoon. The fish are dead. Melissa's wish. One of her last wishes anyhow. Sit down, Hubert." There was a silence. The 2 men watched the lines upon lines of the tiny, tropical fish, their white bellies upwards, absolutely still above the pearly shells and green plants at the bottom of the tank. A few harlequins and striped angels appeared grotesque, grouped around a fluorescent rock. Above it all, an impressive black Molly spread her veils in mourning. Melissa knew 6 months ago that she was dying of leukemia. She wanted to know the truth. On my first visit after that conversation, she gave me a letter. The doctor bent down, opened his black bag, and took out a long white envelope with Melissa's initials on it. "This letter is for you, Hubert, to confirm her wish. She has written a similar one to me. As the time is short, I will explain it all to you. Read the letter later. As you know, I was your sister's physician for over 40 years. When she knew about her ultimate disease, she asked me to carry out her final wish." The doctor poured himself a glass of brandy. "You had better have one too, Hubert. It is not easy to hear the rest." He handed a full glass to Hubert and settled again in the white, fan-like armchair. Hubert fixed his eyes on the shining lines of the dead fish. "Go on," he said, and took a long sip of the brandy. "Melissa asked me to sever her hands, embalm them, and put them in a glass case to be kept on the rococo table in the blue drawing room. She selected the rings and bracelets to be put on her hands, and with the surgical ink which I supplied, she marked her wrists exactly where she wished her hands to be amputated." Hubert sat motionless. The half-full glass of brandy slipped from his hand. A star-like stain was seeping through the white carpet. In a codicil to her will, Melissa stipulated that the case with her hands and all the jewelry shall be finally buried with you. Still, Hubert Weldon did not move. The frosty autumn sun shone in shimmering streaks through the lace curtains. Your sister and I have discussed the process in detail, the doctor continued. I have shown her all the instruments I will be using. I've told her that the hands will have to be steeped in natron for 30 days. It was then that she suggested that the tropical fish tank be used for the steeping of her hands. She wanted to know if the fish could be preserved as well. When told that it was impossible, she instructed me to kill the fish by switching off the heating system and to ask you to bury them in the White Rose Garden. Hubert Weldon rose from his chair and went to the window. The October afternoon was sinking fast in the blue smudges of early dusk. "Dear Melissa," he said, pressing his palms on the fish tank, "what a marvelous, endearing idea. In this way she will remain with me until my own final departure." If Dr. Forbes was surprised at Hubert's reaction, he did not show it. "We will have to move fast. The hands must be cut off within an hour, before rigor mortis sets in and the blood becomes congealed. Thanks to Melissa's precise planning, we can have the massage board which was used over her bath to put her on, and let the blood drip into the bath and leave the taps running. I'll tell you the rest as we progress. When it is over, you will have to tell Melissa's personal maid, because she will have to dress her for the final exit." The two men acted swiftly. The massage board was put over the bathtub in Melissa's bathroom. The dressing table was cleared of the numerous jars and bottles and frilly boxes, and Dr. Forbes laid out his orthopedic saw and a number of tools and bandages. "We shall need a fairly large container to soak the hands in for 10 hours. Hubert produced a Victorian wash basin, circled with rosebuds and butterflies. "That will do fine," the doctor observed. The two men lifted Melissa from the depths of the pillows and eiderdowns and carried her to the bathroom. Dr. Forbes pulled up the gossamer lace cuffs, and there was a dark blue line about 3 inches above the wrists. "That's where Melissa wants her hands cut, just enough room to put on all the bracelets. You will have to hold her palm tightly, Hubert." In the next 10 minutes, the sound of the orthopedic saw penetrated the atmosphere of the bathroom, filled thick with Melissa's white rose essence. The cold water taps were turned on, and Melissa's blood ran out into the drains. With a jerk, the right hand was severed, and simultaneously, Melissa's eyelids shot up. Her eyes, dark blue and icy, stared at the two men. "Trust your sister," the doctor said. "She wants to know if I am doing my job properly." With great speed, the old physician cauterized the blood vessels and bandaged the stump of her arm. "Hold her hand above the bathtub, Hubert, so that the blood will flow away." The old doctor opened the cupboard, took out a large container, and poured a pale green liquid in the Victorian wash basin. He took Melissa's hand from Hubert and plunged it into the shallow pool. "It's palm wine. Got it from Egypt 2 months ago, when I knew the clock was ticking fast. It will drain out every drop of blood from the hands necessary for the embalming." The amputation of the left hand was completed. The hand sank in the Victorian basin, which was covered with a thick bath towel and locked in the cupboard. Melissa was carried back to her bed, the cauterized stumps of her arms neatly bandaged and covered with gossamer lace. "You will have to tell Melissa's personal maid all about this," Dr. Forbes said. "There is exactly 1 hour left to wash her and dress her. Swear the maid to secrecy until the hands are completely preserved and laid out in the glass case." Hubert Weldon asked the butler to send his sister's personal maid, Maud Barrett, to the blue drawing room. As she entered, Melissa's hands seemed to float in the air from the pictures on the walls. "Your mistress is dead in the common sense," Hubert said, "but I shall need you around all the same. At the moment, your task is to prepare her for the final journey. As it is the principal rule of your profession never to ask any questions, and never to talk about anything concerning the lady you serve, I feel sure that there is nothing more to be said." The undertakers arrived soon afterwards, and by 7 o'clock in the evening Melissa was laid in a white coffin, lined with white satin and lace, her arms tucked in a white mink muff. As the candles flickered round her in the blue drawing room, Hubert emptied the tropical fish tank, put the dead fish in a silver cigarette box, and buried it under the roots of Melissa's white roses. Following Dr. Forbes's instructions, He washed the tank with a solution of salt and surgical spirit and carried it into the bathroom. At 3 o'clock in the morning, exactly 10 hours after the amputation of Melissa's hands, the old physician arrived. He filled the tank with the solution of natron and transferred the hands from the flowered basin into the somber glass container. He put the glass tank with Melissa's hands in it into a cupboard and locked it and handed the keys to Hubert. It must stay there for 30 days, but of course you can visit the hands whenever you wish. 3 days later, Melissa joined her parents in the white marble tomb in the village church. It was an early morning service, and Hubert Weldon returned to Fernhill Manor just after 11 o'clock. He asked the butler to assemble the staff in the hall. "Perhaps you will find my instructions strange," Hubert said. "If you do, then you will have to leave my employment. Otherwise, your engagement here will continue, with double wages as from today. What I want you to do is to carry on as usual, as if my sister were still here. Her place at the table will have to be laid out. Her books and daily papers ready in the breakfast room. Her bath run morning and evening. Her bedroom ready for her, and everything exactly as she used to have it. As far as I am concerned, she is still here, and will be as long as I live." Hubert's orders were carried out. At mealtimes, the butler solemnly offered the silver dishes to Melissa's empty chair. Her daily papers and magazines were delivered and set out at her window seat in the breakfast room. The personal maid, who so far was the only one to know the secret of the severed hands, laid out dresses and hats and handbags, and spread elaborate nightgowns every evening on Melissa's bed. Hubert went to see the Bond Street jewelers and ordered a glass case, lined with white satin and with a lace-edged cushion. For a fleeting moment, he considered the longed-for visit to Lapland, but concluded that he could not leave Melissa's hands. Since her death, he developed an overwhelming fascination for his sister, despite the fact that she had deprived him of the Cambridge University studies, of Lapland, of adventures, women, everything. He was 65 now, lost in the world he did not know. Yes, she was ugly, but a woman all the same. Her hands were of a rare, eternal beauty. Melissa was right to make sure that they remained with her brother until the last of his days. Every night at 11 o'clock, the time he had said good night to Melissa. While she was alive, Hubert went to the sickly scented bathroom and opened the cupboard. In the dim light of the cascade of white roses chandelier, the hands were floating in the transparent liquid. Hubert did not know if his feelings were just brotherly love or a conglomerate of longing and visions, or the results of ultimate fantasies. But every night he seized the glass tank with his arms, looking closely at the hands, which were rather grotesque, with fingers wide apart and the palms puffed up and green. The glass case was delivered to Fernhill Manor early in December 1970. In the meantime, Dr. Forbes took Melissa's hands from the natron bath, dried them in a pure linen sheet, injected them with a warm solution of pure beeswax, and carefully formed the fingers and the palms into the exquisite shape for which Melissa's hands were famous. He handed a key ring to Hubert. In the right drawer of her writing desk is the jewelry case containing the rings and bracelets, which she wishes to be put on her hands and wrists. But before that, Hubert, you will have to talk to the manicurist. The hands will have to be made up in the way she did it for Melissa's photographic sessions. Obviously, the process of embalming has discolored them. Also, the nails will have to be varnished. After that, her services will not be needed, as the hands will be sealed in the glass case forever. I suggest that you offer her a substantial check as a parting gift. You might mention that you would be grateful if there is no publicity about the matter. I would prefer you to be present during my conversation with the manicurist," Hubert Weldon said. The doctor agreed, but first talked to the personal maid. She will have to make some sort of lace cuffs to finish off the effect. It was easy to talk to Maud Barrett because she was fully aware of the situation. She promised to produce the lace cuffs in 2 hours. It was a different story with Jane Emery, the manicurist. She was a small, squirrel-like creature with fast-moving eyes, a mop of short reddish hair, and a pinkish complexion. As usual, Dr. Forbes consoled himself with a glass of brandy. Hubert Weldon asked Miss Emery to sit down. Close at his elbow was a check book. "How long were you with my sister?" he asked. "Almost 40 years, sir. Since her departure from us, you must have felt that your service in this house has ended." "Yes, sir," the tiny woman said. The doctor took another gulp from his brandy glass. Hubert grasped the checkbook. "There is one more thing, Miss Emery, you can do for my sister, the most important service of all." "To be obliged," the woman squirrel said. "You know how Miss Melissa loved her hands. For months she knew that she was dying. She resented the thought that her hands would die with her." Miss Emery wriggled in her armchair. "On her wish," the doctor said, "her hands were to be preserved and will remain in this house as long as Mr. Weldon lives." The tiny woman wriggled more, but the doctor preferred the sharp treatment. "Her hands were severed and embalmed, Miss Emery. Now we need your help to make the hands up as you used to for her photographic sessions, and to varnish the nails. Mr. Weldon is, of course, aware that this is a very special service and he is offering you." The doctor looked at Hubert. £2,000, Hubert said. Through Miss Emery's head flashed the image of the thatched cottage in Devon she had once seen on a Christmas card and was dreaming about ever since. "When am I expected to do it?" she asked. "Right now. Please go and get your working case." When she returned a few minutes later, Melissa's hands, wrapped in pure linen towels, were laid on the table. Jane Emery opened her case and carefully put out the jars of creams, the bottles of herbal essences, the assorted powders, cotton wool, small sponges, and nail lacquers. "Would you rather be left alone?" asked Hubert Weldon. "Oh no, please no," Miss Emery said. Silently, Dr. Forbes poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed one to Hubert. Miss Emery had to try twice to unwrap the hands from the linen towels before she finally succeeded. For a few minutes she tried to remember the years when she was a freelance manicurist in London. She had a vast clientele, ranging from duchesses to well-to-do butchers' wives and call girls. 2 of the old clients died, and she was called to treat their hands for the last dance. The only difference was that those hands were attached to the rest of the body, whereas these were cut off. She almost fainted when she touched the ice-cold hands, but remembered swiftly the thatched cottage, the Tropicana roses, and the cushions of daffodils which Hubert Weldon's check would buy, and went on with her job. The finished hands were as exquisite in death as they were in life. Hubert Weldon opened the jewelry box and took out the 6 rings and 6 bracelets which Melissa had selected, according to her precise written instructions. He and the doctor placed the large emerald ring in a cluster of diamonds, the wreath of rubies and the oval sapphire on the right hand, the gold dress ring with diamond snowdrops, the garnet and pearl cluster, and a single, enormous diamond called Orion on her left hand. 3 matching bracelets were put on each wrist. Maud Barrett entered the room carrying a pair of white lace cuffs. When she saw her mistress's hands laid on the table, she almost dropped to her knees. She recovered with the help of the doctor and placed the cuffs above the bracelets. Dr. Forbes moistened the cushion with surgical glue and asked Hubert to select the pose from Melissa's pictures, in which he would like her hands to be placed in the glass case. For a while Hubert went from one picture to another and then took one off the wall. Observing it carefully, Miss Emery put the hands on the cushion, holding them firmly down until the glue hardened. Dr. Forbes placed the lid on the case and inserted a thin glass tube in the small hole in one corner. He sealed the lid all round and then sucked the air out, and with Hubert's help sealed the small hole. For a long while the 4 people looked silently at the beautifully preserved hands, almost alive, warm in color, and so very much a grand occasion with the superb jewelry. Without a word, Hubert Weldon lifted the glass case, and followed by the doctor, the manicurist, and the maid, walked slowly through the corridor and down the heavily carved staircase to the blue drawing-room. He put the glass case on the rococo table. "Miss Barrett, I wish to have white roses put on this table 3 times a week." Miss Barrett and Miss Emery left the blue drawing-room, and Hubert Weldon and Dr. Forbes stood close to the rococo table. "The most difficult thing which remains is to tell the rest of the staff," the doctor said. The only way you can do it, Hubert, is to be bold and matter-of-fact about it. Do not be sheepish, ashamed, or shy. Just tell them. Next morning in the galleried hall the line of servants stood still. Jane Emery, the manicurist, had left shortly after dawn. Hubert Weldon entered the hall with Dr. Forbes behind him. Slowly he walked past the line of servants and went to the high-backed chair at the head of the vast room. You all know that my departed sister Melissa loved her beautiful hands very much. So did my parents and I. Perhaps that was the reason for her wish, expressed in her last will. She asked the family physician to sever her hands, embalm them, and, adorned with her best jewelry, put them in a glass case to be kept on the rococo table in the blue drawing room. She has expressed her wish that the hands are to be buried with me when I finally leave this house forever. True to the rules of his profession, the butler's face did not register any emotion. The housekeeper's chin dropped a little. The personal maid's face was stone cold. The cook, the housemaids, and the kitchen maid apparently did not understand fully the meaning of it all. "Will you please follow me?" said Hubert Weldon, and started to cross the hall towards the blue drawing room. Dr. Forbes and the staff followed. All the lights were on in the large, tapestried room. The glass case rested on the rococo table, surrounded by enormous white roses. Melissa's hands appeared alive, the effect of the rings and bracelets intensified by the unusually strong December sun. "I expect all of you to carry on with your duties as if my sister were still with us. It should be a great help to you to see the beautiful hands as often as you wish to. I have already doubled your wages because the service is rather unusual. Added to that, you will all have a bonus of £100 every Christmas, and I will make provision in my will for those who are in my service until I die." The silence that followed was as deep as the Dead Sea. Without a word, the butler led the staff from the room. Next morning the housekeeper, Mrs. Nora Healy, telephoned her son at his office in the city. "Graham, do come tomorrow morning to take me home. Do not ask any questions, just come." Of course Graham Healy asked questions. It was 8 years since his father died, leaving his affairs in a great muddle. His independent mother cashed a small insurance and took the job of housekeeper at Fernhill Manor. He was not a devoted son, and most certainly did not cherish the obvious prospect of his mother joining his wife and 3 children in his cozy house in Wimbledon. "Are you going on holiday?" Graham Healy asked with a faint hope. "I am leaving here for good. The reason is too awful to tell you. You may not even believe it." Graham Healy was determined to prevent any hasty, maybe hysterical actions by his mother. "Now listen, mother. Do not do anything silly. Do not tell anyone that you want to leave until you see me tomorrow. I will arrive about 11 o'clock in the morning as a surprise visit. We will talk it over." "All right, Mum. You will agree with me when you know the horrible story," Mrs. Healy said. Next day Graham Healy arrived in a flashy 2-tone Citroën. His strong frame carried well the slightly loud tweed suit and a matching tie. His donkey brown hair was cut short and brushed in a sleek helmet. His face was permanently cheerful. He was a copywriter with a well-known Anglo-American advertising combine, and was responsible for jingles and sketches from cauliflower pest killers to a Saragossa eel dinner on a chartered yacht. Mrs. Healy waited for her son in her apartment with dry sherry and scampy canapes. Graham Healy remained silent for a long while after his mother concluded her story. "Who knows about this outside the house?" he asked. "Nobody yet," Mrs. Healy told him. "The staff was introduced to the hands only last night." Graham Healy finished the glass of sherry and poured himself another. "Mother, you must stay here for another week or 10 days. Under no circumstances must you let anyone know that you are planning to leave. Luckily, your apartment is in the west wing, and there is a back door to it from the vegetable garden. I will be back the day after tomorrow, and nobody will know that I am here." Mrs. Healy was alarmed. "Graham, what are proposing to do?" "I am just being practical, Mother. This is the story of the decade, maybe the century. You will need a home to go to when you leave here, and I have a large mortgage still to pay on my house. Miss Weldon's hands will give that to us." Mrs. Healy did not understand fully what her son wanted to do, but she sensed that money was involved. "Perhaps I owe it to you, Graham. Your father did not leave you anything and you have been very generous about that. I will stay for the time you have asked me to." Back in London, Graham Healy acted swiftly. He told his boss that he wanted to spend a few days with his mother in the country because she was not well. He spent a whole afternoon in a photographic equipment shop, getting everything necessary for his camera to take pictures day and night. He telephoned his great friend, Dean Rayner, the reporter on a scandal trading paper, the Daily Zodiac, to stand by for one of the biggest scoops of the century. He told his wife the same sad story about his ailing mother and left her in the architect-designed Wimbledon house with the 3 children vomiting in chorus, after drinking carpet shampoo just for fun. He arrived at Fernhill Manor shortly after 10 o'clock. The full moon was throwing down sheets of silver, and, after parking his car under the branches of weeping trees, Graham Healy threaded his way to the vegetable garden and the back door to his mother's apartment. Mrs. Healy was sitting in a semi-darkened room, not knowing when her son would arrive. "There's no time to waste, Mother. When does Mr. Weldon go to bed?" 12 o'clock. "He sits in the library until 11, and then goes to the blue drawing room to spend an hour with the hands. He reaches his bedroom exactly at 12 o'clock. "And the servants?" Graham asked. "They are in bed by 10, even sooner." At 12:20, Graham Healy assembled his camera and all the other equipment, switched on a tiny torch, and asked his mother to take him to the blue drawing room. It was a long way from the West Wing, through twisting corridors and a few steps up and down. Finally, they reached the hall, and Mrs. Healy opened the door of the tapestried room. Even Graham was taken aback by the vastness and the beauty of the 4 walls and the stuccoed ceiling. In the center, the rococo table stood in all its magnificence. From a bed of white roses, the glass case containing Melissa's hands rose up like a fairy tale miniature castle. The rings and the bracelets shone like red, blue, green, and white fires in the torchlight. A hard-boiled chestnut he was. Graham Healy was silent for a moment, but he recovered quickly, assessing the tremendous value of this scene and the story behind it. In a few moments, he set up his camera and the lights and took pictures from every angle many times. "Tomorrow morning I will take a few shots of the house and the gardens. After that, Mother, we'll not need to worry." Next morning, Graham Healy was up early taking pictures of the semi-wild gardens, the weeping trees, the house itself from the angle of the scenic topiary. "Don't do anything, say anything, until you hear from me," he told his mother before roaring off in his 2-tone Citroën. In London, he telephoned Dean Rayner. They met at the Modest Horse and Groom Inn in Kensington. Dean Rayner agreed that Graham Healy's story was a huge scoop. "What about Hubert Weldon?" Graham Healy asked. "After all, I've taken all the photographs without his permission." "We are prepared," Dean Rayner assured him. "We have a large kitty for court cases. I want £20,000 for the story, and the photographs. I know you'll have it syndicated around the world. You'll make a fortune," Graham Healy said. Dean Rayner started to write the check. "Make it cash and come with me to the bank tomorrow morning," Graham Healy suggested. "That way I'll get the money and you'll get the photographs and the story." In the evening, he telephoned his mother and told her to leave Fernhill Manor right away. "I've booked you into a cozy hotel close to our house for the time being," he told her. On 12 December 1970, the Daily Zodiac carried a front-page story, headlined "Miss Melissa's Hands," endorsed with the pictures of the glass case and the jeweled hands in Fernhill Manor taken over the scenic topiary. The impact was tremendous. Within hours, the grounds of Fernhill Manor were crowded with reporters and photographers. Hubert Weldon refused to meet them. Cars started to arrive filled with families and gaping children. The butler advised Hubert Weldon to have the grounds cleared by the police. That was done, and by the evening the place was quiet and normal. Next day, the Daily Zodiac carried another front-page story, with the full details of the rings and bracelets on Melissa's hands, and the price quoted as £300,000. Dr. Forbes called just before lunch, and over the usual glass of brandy, told Hubert Weldon to realize the situation. Now that the world knows that in this remote house a dead woman's hands are endorsed with jewelry worth £300,000, you must immediately insure the hands and secure the windows and the doors. Hubert telephoned his solicitors, and within 3 weeks everything necessary was done. Fernhill Manor had almost become an electronic fortress. Suddenly, Hubert Weldon remembered the only full portrait of Melissa by Henry Iwitz. In that portrait, he did not let her float away into a misty background. Ruthlessly with his brush, he registered her face, long and thin, her nose almost like a beak and her icy blue eyes small and round, her shoulders visibly hunched. Dressed in clouds of white chiffon, seated in a dark blue velvet armchair, her exquisite hands folded in her lap, that was the true Melissa Weldon. Melissa threw violent tantrums about the portrait, and it was covered in an old sheet and locked in an attic room. The butler was asked to bring the life-size portrait to Hubert's study. Dr. Forbes was summoned and requested to perform yet another service to Melissa. "I am rather clumsy," Hubert Weldon said. "Could you please, with your orthopedic saw, cut out the precise silhouette of Melissa from the picture?" "Whatever for?" the doctor asked. "That way she can be with me all the time, sitting at the dinner table or in the blue drawing room." Loneliness, the old doctor thought. Terrible, bottomless loneliness. He agreed to cut Melissa out of the picture and suggested a small adjustment to make it possible to let her sit in an armchair. Hubert was delighted. "You have made my Christmas," he told the doctor. Next, Hubert Weldon consulted Maud Barrett. "As a personal maid of my sister's for many years, you know, of course, all about sewing and padding?" he asked. "Of course, sir," Miss Barrett answered. "Then there is a special task for you to do," Hubert said, and led Miss Barrett to the corner of his study. Miss Barrett fainted when she saw her dead mistress sitting quite easily in an armchair. She recovered after a splash of brandy was thrown in her face by Hubert. "It's just a portrait of my sister cut out. Could you please put some padding on the back of this silhouette, and cover it with anything you think right? That way you will be able to dress her for all occasions." Miss Barrett was on the point of fainting again, but remembered the double wages and the £100 for a Christmas bonus so near, and said, "Yes, sir." 2 days later Melissa appeared, quite firm and solid, and Hubert progressed with his Christmas plans. He ordered the 2 gardeners to decorate the whole house with holly and mistletoe and masses of tinsel. He told the butler to set the Christmas Day table with the Georgian silver and the Sevres china. He asked Miss Barrett to fill Melissa's bedroom and boudoir with dozens of white roses. In the absolute privacy of his study, Hubert Weldon admitted to himself that his obsession with his sister had reached abnormal proportions. The dreams of women he had never had came to life in a bizarre cluster of sensual visions, centered on Melissa's profile and her hands. For 40 years she had dominated his life. The cult of her hands took over, her ugliness took over. He knew it all through the years, and he knew it now. But it was too late to emerge from the depth of total isolation into the living world. The Christmas dinner was macabre. He had asked Maud Barrett to dress the silhouette of Melissa in an evening gown, with a tiara and the white mink wrap. The food was superb with all the traditional courses. The butler offered all the dishes to Melissa's silhouette first. After coffee and brandy, Hubert asked the butler to call in the staff. From a silver basket, he took out elaborate Christmas envelopes with £100 in crisp, new notes for every member of the household, marked with best Christmas wishes from Melissa Weldon. The servants bowed first to the silhouette of Melissa and then to Hubert. "Merry Christmas," he said. The rest of the Yuletide passed quietly. Maud Barrett dressed the silhouette of her dead mistress in appropriate attire from morning till evening. On the last day of December 1970, the staff of Fernhill Manor left the house. Only the butler, Alfred Stubbs, remained. He was almost 70 years old with 50 years of service with the Weldon family. He was not disturbed by the hands or the silhouette. In fact, He rather liked the ghostly presence of the young Miss Weldon. Hubert designed a complete detachment of Fernhill Manor from the outer world. He had a shelter outside the gates for the tradesmen to leave their deliveries in. The electronic devices in the house were switched on day and night. Hubert moved into Melissa's bedroom, with the adjoining bathroom and boudoir, and ordered Stubbs to close all the rooms but the blue drawing room on the ground floor. His time was completely taken up by his macabre obsession with his dead sister. He dressed and undressed Melissa several times a day, finally putting a transparent chiffon nightdress on the silhouette. Due to Dr. Forbes's clever device, the figure, cut out from hard canvas, was able to sit or to be stretched out. In the deathly white bedroom with the white chiffon roses floating in the air, Hubert lay, painfully awake, in the quilted satin bed, with Melissa's silhouette next to him. Desperately, he was fighting the final scene of degradation, but he was losing, and in the deepest end of his frustrated heart he was glad of that. It was early March 1971. The evening was misty, the air filled with the sickly scent of early grass. As a last barrier, Hubert Weldon tried to remember his sister lying in her white coffin, her arms tucked in a mink muff. He tried to remember her face, so much uglier in death than in life. But it did not help. She owed him a lot, he thought, almost his whole life. The time had come for her to make it up to him lavishly. That night he sprayed Melissa's perfume, the white roses noon, all over the silhouette and let the nightgown slip to the floor. He had warmed the bed with a number of hot water bottles, and the canvas image was warm to the touch. Violently, Hubert Weldon masturbated for more than an hour. He was not ashamed in the morning, not happy either, just obsessed with red, burning desire. There was a fantastic advantage in the ghostly association with Melissa's silhouette. She was always willing. As weeks passed by, Hubert remained more and more in the bedroom suite. Alfred Stubbs, who by now was everything from butler to cook, a daily help and gardener, was worried. On a warm May Sunday, when Hubert did not come down to lunch by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the old man went up to the bedroom to call him. His knock on the door was not answered, and he entered, only to see his master in the final throes of ecstasy. Obviously nothing was said about it, but the old servant was sick right through his entire system. More frequently, he went down to the cellar and carried up bottles of whiskey to his room behind the kitchen. More and more he was sinking into an alcoholic oblivion. He was unable to collect the tradesmen's deliveries from the shelter. Consequently, there was no food in the house. When he remembered, he would bring in the supplies accumulated for days and cook something smelly and disgusting. But the hungry Hubert Weldon ate it eagerly. In the early autumn, Dr. Forbes called on Hubert Weldon to tell him that he was retiring from his general practice and was going to spend his remaining years with his brother in Jersey. A young man was taking over, and Dr. Forbes was sure that he would look after Hubert well. He was appalled at the sight of Hubert unshaven, wearing a pair of dirty pajamas, sour-smelling, sitting on the edge of Melissa's bed with the silhouette of the dead woman tucked under the coverlet. His eyes were sunken in a silvery mist, like that of a dead fish, and the right corner of his mouth was full of saliva. The old doctor looked closely at Hubert Weldon. "Whatever you are doing, stop it. Stop it now while there is still time," he said, and left the room. From his surgery, he telephoned Hubert's solicitor and asked him to go to see his client right away. The lawyer went and had a long talk with Hubert in the blue drawing room. "There is the question of Mr. Weldon's will now that he has inherited the considerable fortune of his sister," he said. Hubert told him that he would deal with it later. The most important thing was that he did not want to be disturbed by the necessities of daily life. He had standing orders with the local shopkeepers, and wanted the solicitor to arrange with them to send the bills to the village branch of his bank for payment. He wished to be completely isolated from the outside world. The solicitor accepted the stipulation. He had been used to peculiar clients. The routine of his office would go on, and every 6 months there would be a check on Mr. Weldon, should he not contact them earlier. Hubert Weldon sank into his very deep personal life. During the day, he sat in the blue drawing room watching Melissa's exquisite hands, lying so serenely, yet opulent in the glass case. Her silhouette was sitting opposite him, dressed in the silk and lace he had chosen for her in the morning. When Stubbs woke up from his ever-deepening alcoholic comas, he would bring up a tray of dark brown eggs and half-warmed vegetable soup. The tension grew between the two old men. Alfred Stubbs knew of the macabre sensations going on in Miss Melissa's bedroom. The deep, inner sickness had built up in him for weeks. One morning, when Hubert was having one of his rare baths, Stubbs went to the white bedroom and lifted the silhouette from the bed. He carried it downstairs and into the grounds, and hung it on a topiary eagle and set it alight. From his bathroom, Hubert caught the glow of the shimmering flames, weaving through the wintry morning. Pressing close to the window pane, he saw Melissa's face hanging from the beak of the overgrown privet bird. The rest of the silhouette had fallen off and was burning fiercely on the ground. Wrapped in a bath towel, Hubert raced down the stairs and out to the topiary. He had almost caught Alfred Stubbs by his butler's tails, but stumbled over a tree trunk. The old butler ran across the frosty grass and through the hall and corridors towards the wine cellar. Luckily, he had left the heavy door open when he carried out some whiskey earlier in the day, and he flew through, slamming the door behind him. Hubert tried to open it, but it was impossible. Obviously, the electronic mechanism had failed somewhere. Perhaps one of the fuses had blown. Hubert returned to the bathroom and dressed in the old flannel slacks and a heavy cardigan which he had been wearing for months. Now only the hands were left. He decided that Melissa's bedroom must remain her shrine, and his memories of the macabre, carnal, yet unbelievingly enchanting and tender hours spent there. He locked the door and threw the key out of the window. It was swallowed by a heap of rusty, frozen leaves. Then he went to the blue drawing room and sat close to the glass case. On the white cushion, the hands seemed warmed up by the glow of the magnificent jewels. "From now on, we will live in this room only. Just the three of us," Hubert told the hands. Down in the wine cellar, Alfred Stubbs considered the situation. He was fully aware of his master's wrath, and decided to stay out of the way until the evening and then try to get to his quarters. He hoped that the next day might bring some solution. It was just after noon, and the old man opened a bottle of whiskey. The cellar was vast and cold, and Alfred Stubbs began to worry about what would happen to him if the next day did not bring the hoped-for solution. By 4 o'clock, he opened another bottle of whiskey. He tried to switch on the light, but the place remained in darkness. He knew every part of the cellar, and despite the intake of alcohol in the past few hours, he found his way between the shelves and boxes and baskets, and grasped the banister of the staircase. He inched his way up and tried to open the door. After a while, he realized that the door would not open. The damn machinery, he thought, sobering up through fear. He forgot Hubert Weldon's wrath and called and banged on the door. Then he screamed and kicked the heavy frame, and knocked with his elbows in a frantic staccato. He had dropped to his knees and wept the humiliating tears of drunkenness and panic. The only consolation was his luminous wristwatch. The golden light of the dial shone up to the old man's face with a positive friendliness. He got up and staggered down the stairs, and with his hands felt the narrow path among all the booze. He found the old armchair in the middle of the cellar and grabbed the nearest bottle. It was brandy, and an experienced butler, he could tell its age by just one sniff. It took the jammed door to get hold of this brandy. He laughed and sobbed in his heart. He took the watch off his wrist and held it close to his face, as the only thing left to cling to. He dropped it during a spasm of violent coughing. He almost finished the bottle of brandy and slid down to the floor to look for the watch. On all fours, like an old, clumsy retriever, he moved round and back and forwards. Finally, very close, he saw the numbers of the dial like a cluster of shining fireflies. He had always remembered fireflies, because his mother wore them in her hair for the barn dances in the hot summer nights of his childhood. He reached out and fell hard on his face. As he tried to pull himself up, a deep wave of nausea surged through him. He caught the last glimpse of the fireflies before he died, inhaling his vomit. Hubert Weldon remembered his butler in the afternoon of the next day, simply because he was hungry. "The old fool is late," Hubert observed sourly and went to the kitchen. There were a few parsnips on the table and some opened, half-full tins of fish and fruit. The old-fashioned Aga stove, which was always beaming steady heat, was dark and cold. The cellar, Hubert recalled. As he progressed through the corridor, the profound stillness of the house intensified. He tried to open the door leading to the cellar, but it was firmly shut. "Stubbs," he called. "Stubbs, come out. I forgive you." Hubert realized that the electronic system had failed. There was no way to contact anybody about it. Some weeks ago, when he had decided on complete isolation from the world, he had the telephone disconnected. It was out of the question that he should go to the village. He would not know whom to look for and what to say. Alfred Stubbs would have to stay where he was. He returned to the kitchen and ate cold fish from a tin and carried another one with fruit to the blue drawing room. By the end of November, Fernhill Manor was intensely cold. The central heating went off. Hubert did not know what to do about it. He had centered his life completely on the blue drawing room. Once a week he carried the supplies there from the shelter. It was increasingly difficult because his toenails grew and curled inwards like claws. His hair and beard met in the middle of his face. His bones were weak and feeble because of the cold. He threw all his clothes and the blankets he had found on the floor and huddled there, with his arms tightly round the case with the hands. Half-opened tins accumulated around him. The smell of his unwashed body thickened to vile proportions. 3 days before Christmas, the first rat appeared in the blue drawing room. An old tramp living in a shack close to the Weldon estate had discovered the deliveries at the Fernhill shelter. He watched for the tradesmen and took the supplies away. Christmas passed with the overgrown, and by now monstrous topiary figures showered in snow crystals. Hubert had found the shelter empty, and for a few days lived on the scraps of the tins. By the middle of January, he was too weak to move from the filthy nest of old clothing and blankets. He laid there with his arms tightly wound round the glass case. The blue drawing room was thick with the stench of urine, rotting meat and excrement. By the end of January 1972, Hubert Weldon's solicitor noticed in his diary that the 6 months' check on his client was due. When he arrived, Fernhill Manor stood silent and forbidding, in a cluster of weeping trees and mirrors of tiny, frozen lakes. Hubert was almost dead. With his arms wreathed firmly round the case with the hands, the doctor was called. He suggested that Hubert Weldon be removed at once to a nursing home, Willow Retreat, in Sussex. But as the ambulance men tried to free the glass case from Hubert's embrace, he woke up from his semi-coma. He refused to let the case go. Wherever he was taken, the hands were to go with him. Finally, the glass case was covered in a blanket and put into the ambulance. The solicitor closed up the house and took the keys with him. Down in the wine cellar, Alfred Stubbs was dead, alone and forgotten. At the Willow Retreat, an exclusive nursing home, a large room was prepared for Hubert Weldon. The doctor had alerted the matron, Miss Teresa Evans, about the rich recluse coming under her wing. She was 45 years old, heavy-boned, her frame covered with tough flesh. Her face was oval and her eyes dark and moist, and she had a thick mane of dusty blonde hair. Her feet were small and her legs slim, and she moved with a surprising ease and lightness. Before the Willow Retreat, she was a sister at a second-rate maternity clinic in the suburbs of London. At that time, abortions were strictly illegal, but Miss Evans was rather flexible with regard to the law. With the help of Nurse Valerie Ambrose, she had established a flourishing abortion practice at her old Victorian house in Ealing. The monthly accounts from her bank grew longer, listing cash, shares, and investments. She was reading the statements with a special eagerness. As a young nurse, she was working aboard a sumptuous liner, cruising the Caribbean. She promised herself, when the time came, to retire on one of the aquamarine islands. When the abortions became legal, the harvest at the Ealing house ended. The Caribbean seemed lost forever. Her many gynecological friends from the past were eager to settle her in a legitimate job. The matronship of the Willow Retreat fell easily into her lap. On his arrival, Hubert Weldon was a mess. From the stretcher, he had watched anxiously the two men carrying the large, blanket-covered case. He wanted it to be put next to his bed. The first few hours were absorbed by shaving, hair and nail cutting, and a prolonged stay in the bath, with vibrant scrubbing. Finally, in neat pajamas and smelling of a deodorant soap, he was met by the wide smile of matron Teresa Evans. "Welcome, Mr. Weldon. You will be looked after well here. Just tell us what you want and we'll do the rest." The first evening at Willow Retreat, Hubert was sent off into a deep, soothing sleep by a large dose of sedatives. After midnight, matron Evans entered his room. She was not worried about the new patient. She knew that he was beyond reach just then. She wanted to know what was under that dark cover close to his bed. Teresa Evans knelt beside the oblong structure and pulled off the cover. She gasped and almost fainted. On a gleaming white cushion lay a pair of exquisite hands, with pearl-white varnished nails and clusters of rings and bracelets. For a few minutes the matron was stunned. Then she remembered the front-page story in the Daily Zodiac about a year ago. Of course, she said to herself, the famous hands of Melissa Weldon. From that minute of recognition, Teresa Evans had designed her course of action. She visited Hubert Weldon for 1 hour every afternoon. She suggested doing some shopping for him to boost his morale. She bought him 3 pairs of silk pajamas and a Japanese dressing gown and an exotic aftershave lotion. She baked special cakes for his teas. At the end of the 4th week at Willow Retreat, Hubert Weldon seemed back to normal. He took his tea regularly with the matron, and, feeling well and easy, he went back to his early youth and told her about his expedition to Lapland. "Perhaps one day you will go there again," the matron said, "and I would like to go there with you." With every afternoon tea, Hubert's attachment to Teresa Evans deepened. By the end of March, he had removed the last barrier between them. When the matron entered his room, he unwrapped the glass case and introduced her to the hands. As she drank her tea, Teresa Evans was certain that the hands were staring at her. She fixed her eyes on the jewels and remembered the quoted price, £300,000. They were married at the end of April 1972. Of course, Teresa Evans did not jump blindly into wedlock. She had employed a private detective soon after Hubert's entrance into the nursing home and had all the facts and figures tidy in her notebook. From Hubert's medical history, she was fully aware of the macabre state of Fernhill Manor. She had employed the help of her former abortion associate, Nurse Valerie Ambrose, now married to a building contractor Charles Moore. He moved in, while Teresa, Hubert and the hands were on honeymoon in Jersey. He cleaned the kitchen and the blue drawing room, and employed a day gardener to shape the monstrous topiary to its proper pattern. When the Weldons came back, the big house was limping on its wings. There was no staff, no central heating, no electric stove. The new Mrs. Weldon saw to all that. Within a few days, the newest all-purpose electric stove was installed and the central heating was switched on. As Hubert had refused to open Melissa's suite or rooms, and he could not anyhow, as the key was buried in the heap of leaves, Tilda Teresa turned a reception room into her bedroom, and the blue drawing room was equipped with a bed for Hubert. The hands were settled again on the rococo table. Teresa had the telephone reconnected and put her orders through with the local tradesmen. She had studied carefully the handbook about the electronic devices installed in the house, and inspected every button and every fuse connected with it. Finally, she had arrived at the door leading to the wine cellar. She had tried hard to open it, but without success. "The door to the wine cellar is jammed," she told Hubert. "It has been for a long time," her husband told her. "And by the way, there is a dead man down there." For a dreadful moment, Teresa Weldon thought that Hubert's senses were leaving him. For her plans, she needed him sane for at least another 4 weeks. "A dead man? In the cellar?" "Yes, my dear. He was my butler, and in the last few months he became an alcoholic. He went down to the cellar frequently, and one day the door slammed after him. Something had happened to the electronic system. Didn't you do anything about it?" Teresa asked. "There was no way. The telephone was cut off and I could not go to the village. Didn't anybody miss him? Mrs. Weldon asked. He had nobody. He was 70 years old and the only person he had, his sister, died some years ago. All right, Hubert. It won't do any good to the dead man or to us to stir up the story just now. Let us settle in first and let the sleeping butler lie. Teresa Weldon called in the building contractor, Charles Moore, again. The dining room was reopened and made very cozy. The small study next to the blue drawing room was turned into a bathroom. The rest of the house will stay closed at the moment, Teresa told Charles Moore, but I will be in touch with you again. I have plans which involve you and Valerie. In the evening, Teresa came into the blue drawing room. She wore a lacy pink nightdress, her breasts, rather small and firm, nestling in the low-cut frills. Come to my bedroom, Hubert, but don't bring the hands, she said and glided through the door. For a moment Hubert hesitated. The hands, always present, uncovered in the Jersey honeymoon suite, were the reason that Teresa did not let him touch her. He was rather grateful for that. His only sexual experience was the bizarre sensations with Melissa's silhouette. He did not know how to approach a live woman. For a moment he looked at the hands. To his surprise, he did not feel any emotion, attachment, fear, or regret. He left the room, switching the lights off, and went straight to Teresa's bed. His wife was very understanding and skillful. She guided him through the shyness, clumsiness, and sweats to the final culmination. Next day at the breakfast table, Hubert was touchingly humble. "Oh, Teresa, my wife," he said. It was easy for Mrs. Weldon to suggest that his solicitor should be asked to come to Fernhill Manor. "It is always wise to have a proper will," she said. "As you have nobody you know of, and should you go before me, it would take a long time to settle the whole estate." Hubert agreed, and the solicitor arrived in the first week of June 1972. The will of Hubert Weldon was short and explicit. Everything was left to his wife, Teresa Weldon. His bank accounts, his shares, the large chest of silver deposited at the bank, the Fernhill Manor and its entire contents. The solicitor mentioned the hands and the jewelry on them. He reminded Hubert Weldon that, according to Melissa's codicil, the hands with the jewelry were to be buried with him. Teresa Weldon jerked in her chair but recovered quickly. "If I am here at that sad moment, I will of course carry out my dead sister-in-law's wish." Without delay, Teresa Weldon progressed with her plans. Due to the sudden tremendous publicity for the Seychelles Islands in the papers and the travel agent's advertisements, she had switched her dreams from the Caribbean to the Seychelles, the islands of fragrant spices, cinnamon-thatched bungalows, sleeping tortoises and sheets of multicolored birds rising from the sea. With her tidy fortune in her bank and Hubert's entire estate, she would be able to live in the Seychelles for the rest of her life in a well-cushioned luxury. She was determined to dispatch her husband as soon as possible to join his parents and Melissa in the white marble tomb in the village church, not by murder, but by a much more pleasant and legal means. Hubert was 67 and not very strong. An overdose of the good things of life should do the trick, Mrs. Weldon hoped. Because the wine cellar was locked, with its dead secret within its walls, she had ordered cases of wines and spirits and stored them in the pantry next to the kitchen. From a prominent London store, she selected tins of pâté de foie gras, partridges in port wine, lobsters in pink mayonnaise, and boxes of chocolates and candied fruit. Every lunch and dinner was a feast. Every night Hubert was smothered with kisses and embraces, and taught new tricks of the bedroom. While he slept late in the morning, Teresa was touring the house, taking notes and inventory of every item. She forced open the door to Melissa's apartment and was delighted at the unique furniture there. She summoned Charles and Valerie Moore and discussed her plans with them. She was going to sell all the contents of Fernhill Manor. Charles Moore and Valerie would be entrusted to dispose of it in the antique shops in the county. Teresa would put a precise price on all the items. The Moores would have a generous commission. If they should reach a sum above the limit, it would be theirs. Charles Moore assigned his largest lorry and 2 of his most skillful men to the Fernhill Manor project. In the first days of August, the furniture, carpets, Curtains, china, linen, pictures, and garden equipment were sold. Only the kitchen and the rooms occupied by the Weldons were left intact. Teresa Weldon bought a large iron case and put all the cash received from the sales in it. She unlocked the case every night and listened in ecstasy to the rustle of the accumulating bank notes. For weeks Hubert was unaware of the goings-on at the house. He had put on a huge amount of weight, and his blood pressure shot up to an alarming degree, due to the steady consumption of port and brandy. His lovemaking became increasingly breathless, and he would fall asleep in the middle of it. But Teresa woke him up and persuaded him to another performance. She hated every minute of it, but it was essential to Hubert's fast slide to his grave. By the end of August, Teresa Weldon went to London for a day to see the agents dealing with properties at the Seychelles. Hubert, still in a haze from the previous night, heavy with food and drink and Teresa's almost savage attacks in bed, did not wake up until noon. He called his wife, but there was no answer. He wrapped his dressing gown around him and left the blue drawing room for the first time in weeks. As he entered the hall, he was enveloped by silent emptiness. There was no furniture, and through the large, curtain-less windows the sun poured in like golden rings. He went up the carved staircase, and his steps sounded heavily on the wood. There was no carpet. The landing was also bare, and the open doors of the rooms yawned like old, toothless mouths. The rooms were empty. He turned the door-knob of Melissa's apartment, and it opened, and he went into the bedroom. Only the white chiffon roses were left, limp and dusty, floating close to the ceiling. The sumptuous built-in wardrobes were empty. In the boudoir, a large hat with a cluster of white roses lay in a corner, almost like a wreath. In the bathroom, all the shelves and mirrors were taken out. Even the massage board, on which Melissa had lain while her hands were being severed, was gone. In his old bedroom, a heap of papers and a few dirty shirts intensified the atmosphere of absolute desolation. On the top of the heap was the Cambridge University magazine, with his story, The Remains of Reindeer, publicized on the cover. Hubert sat on the floor and slowly turned the pages. The remains of Reindeer, he thought. Teresa is like the two old Lapp women dismembering the reindeer. Nothing will be wasted, even before the reindeer is dead. Now he understood the reason for Teresa marrying him, and the subsequent fierce sexual feasts, and the floods of heavy food and alcohol. Teresa's very own design for his death. He had returned to the blue drawing room and stood closely to the glass case with the hands. "I am sorry, Melissa," he said aloud, "but your jewels will not be buried with your hands and me. When you made the codicil, we did not have Teresa. Mrs. Weldon came back from London late in the evening. In her bedroom, she deposited the bundle of Seychelles brochures she had brought with her." Hubert decided not to tell his wife that he had seen the empty house. For a few days he had hoped that he would be able to resist the food and the drinks and the bedroom ecstasies. But he had to admit to himself that he was too far gone, and he plunged still deeper into Teresa's gastronomic and sexual lure. Early in October he suffered a mild heart attack, a chance Teresa Weldon was not going to waste. That evening she produced duck in brandy sauce, stuffed with pâté de foie gras and followed by Stilton cheese, soaked in port. She almost carried him to his bed, and, with the Seychelles scenes racing behind her closed eyelids, flung herself on the flabby heap which was Hubert. He had a major stroke close to midnight, and was dead in the early hours of the morning. Teresa progressed according to her long-prepared schedule. She called the doctor, and the death certificate stated without any doubt that Hubert Weldon had died of a major heart attack. Next she telephoned the local police and asked the chief superintendent to come to see her on a matter of urgency. Within an hour the chief arrived with his senior officer. "Some hours before my husband died last night," Mrs. Weldon said. "He told me that his old butler, who was with the family for 50 years, lies dead in the wine cellar. The house is equipped with electronic devices, and apparently something went wrong with the door of the cellar. The chief superintendent wanted to know when that happened. About a year ago. At that time, my husband was living the life of a recluse with no telephone and nobody calling on him. In his condition, He had simply forgotten about the old man in the cellar. The team of the electronic service company was called and the door of the wine cellar was opened. The police found Alfred Stubbs, lying with his face down, his right hand almost touching a wristwatch, embossed in a pool of dried-up vomit. An ambulance man put the watch on the dead man's wrist, and the butler, in his black tails, left the house in a canvas coffin. It was an official exit, with the approval of doctor and police, timed and designed by Mrs. Weldon with her usual perfection. Hubert Weldon was laid out in a massive oak coffin with heavy bronze handles and placed in the middle of the empty hall. The undertakers provided a black velvet-covered stand, because there was nothing at all to put the coffin on. Without knowing it, Teresa Weldon had surpassed the old Lapp women and their reindeer. The funeral was 3 days later, and Teresa moved fast to accomplish the most important task. She went to the blue drawing room with Hubert's bed unmade and his pajamas on the floor. She was certain that from the glass case, Melissa's hands were staring at her. It did not disturb her. With a hammer, she shattered the top of the case. She took hold of the hands and pulled them out, still firmly glued to the white satin cushion. The distinct smell of death mixed with the faint scent of the cosmetics used on the hands. The cold October sun extracted shimmering rainbows from the magnificent jewelry. Teresa removed the lace cuffs, and the 6 bracelets came off the wrists quite easily. But the rings were firmly attached to the stiff fingers. She tried to break them, but the hands were hard like marble. She remembered the basket of garden tools in the greenhouse and went to fetch them. There was the small saw used for pruning roses. It was ideal for the operation. With a strong pull, Teresa Weldon separated the hands from the cushion and placed them on the windowsill. She started with the left hand, and with steady movements severed the 4 fingers. She removed the rings and placed them on her fingers, and proceeded to cut off the fingers on the right hand. It seemed that the huge sapphire refused to leave Melissa's hand. Teresa Weldon had to struggle for a long while before the ring finally fell to the floor. She removed the swans down from the cushion and put the hands with the thumbs still in the graceful position and the fragments of the fingers inside. Just before the funeral, she placed the cushion close to Hubert's face. Something to do with his sister's last wish, she told the funeral manager before he closed the lid. Hubert was almost unknown in the village, and it was only Teresa, Charles, and Valerie Moore, and the undertakers who saw him enter the family tomb. The Moores returned with the widow to Fernhill Manor. Over coffee, thickly laced with brandy, Teresa asked Charles Moore to find a buyer for the house. "You have one," he said. "I'll buy it. I've always wanted a grand old house. I shall be in the Seychelles by Christmas," Teresa said. "If the will is not probated before I go, you will have to complete the purchase of the house with my agents. I'm going to buy a small island in the Seychelles and build one of those low, wide houses, with enormous rooms and a cinnamon-thatched roof." Teresa Weldon took the iron case containing the proceeds from the sales of the contents of Fernhill Manor to her bank to be transferred to the Seychelles on her demand. The remains of Reindeer, as Hubert would have called it, amounted to £50,000. She brought the iron case back home and locked it in with Melissa's jewels, the 6 bracelets and 6 rings, wrapped in cotton wool and tissue paper. She put the case on the rococo table in the blue drawing room, where Melissa's hands used to rest. She had booked her flight to the Seychelles for the middle of December 1972. The last day of October 1972, the passenger liner Amaryllis was 1 day out from Tilbury. She was a fairly new boat, glittering with white paint, picked out in yellow and blue. Henry Iwitz was having a pre-lunch drink in the Barbarossa bar. He drank his very own combination of red rum, Grand Marnier, and sparkling rose wine. The sea was calm like a wash-basin painted blue. The faint rattle of the ice cubes in the glass provided the perfect backdrop to his mental wanderings over the past 23 years, since he left Fernhill Manor and the Weldons. There were times of restless pursuits from one country to another, and times of long, tranquil hours of painting in mountains and fields and Easter forests, and weeks and months of portraying Texas oil heiresses, Broadway call girls and dipsomaniac widows and divorcees alone, and lost in monumental mansions, for large sums of money spent as fast as he made it. Some months ago he had arrived at the dreaded moment, the awareness of which every artist carries deep in his mind. He realized that he could not paint anymore. He had developed an acute aversion to travel, hotels, suitcases, noisy motels, and other people's houses. He wanted to go home, and home was Fernhill Manor. If Melissa and Hubert were still there, he was sure that they would let him stay, and perhaps, mellow as he was now, he might even marry Melissa. With great speed, he had sold the few pictures he had to a small gallery in Sydney, and gave his easels, brushes and paints and canvases to a robust blonde who was staying at the same motel and who claimed to be a painter. He got the last cabin on the Amaryllis and sailed for England in the brilliant sunshine of a Sydney morning. The first day out to sea, he went to the ship's library. He asked for the English newspapers dating a few years back. He wanted to know what was happening in the old country in his absence. The Daily Zodiac of December 1970 hit him hard with the front page story, headlined Miss Melissa's hands, and the picture of the hands he knew so well, endorsed with fabulous rings and bracelets. A subsequent story next day estimated the price of the jewels at £300,000, and quoted Melissa's last wish expressed in her will, that the hands with the jewelry should be finally buried with her brother Hubert. Henry Iwitz went through the rest of the back numbers of the Daily Zodiac page by page. Obviously, the reporters followed the events at Fernhill Manor all through the years. A February issue of 1972 described fully the rich recluse of the Fernhill Manor being brought in a rotting heap to the Willow Retreat nursing home. His marriage to the matron Teresa Evans was reported in April 1972. The October issue of the Zodiac carried a brief notice of Hubert Weldon's death, but a fully blown front page about the dead butler found in the wine cellar of Fernhill Manor. It was an accident due to the failure of the massive electronic devices installed at the house. That evening, over a large number of his red rum combinations, Henry Iwitz dissected the situation. Obviously, there was a widow at Fernhill Manor who had inherited everything. He wondered if she had buried Melissa's hands with the jewels with Hubert Weldon. He was determined to find out. The Amaryllis docked at Tilbury early in the morning on the first day of November 1972. Henry Iwitz looked good in the line of passengers at customs. The passing years had chiseled his face to the right degree of leanness. His auburn hair was spangled with silver streaks, and his tall frame carried well a dark brown tweed suit and a heavy camel hair coat. His set of suitcases, given to him by a prominent Broadway call girl, in addition to the check for her portrait, proclaimed the extravagance of the green crocodile skins. Later that evening he arrived in Hollabrook, the neighboring village to Fernhill Manor. He booked a room at the local inn called the Red Chimneys, and by 9 o'clock was seated on the corner stool at the bar. He knew that he could not ask for his red rum combination, and had ordered a large Scotch on the rocks. The landlord was asked to have one as well, and the conversation unrolled easily. "Yes," Henry Iwitz told him, "I have just arrived from Australia." Almost 23 years ago he had lived at Fernhill Manor, lost touch and come to see if Miss Melissa and Mr. Hubert Weldon were still living there. The landlord told him all Henry knew already from the back numbers of the Zodiac, but he progressed to describe the widow. "Mrs. Weldon is a strong woman in body and in mind," the landlord said. "She had Mr. Hubert right under her heel. He left her everything, and even during his lifetime she had sold most of the furniture from the house. No wonder he was in the family tomb just 6 months after the wedding." Henry wanted to know how old was Mrs. Weldon. About 46 or so. Some old village matrons are sure that she was too much in bed for poor Hubert. If that was the case, at least he died happy. "Was there a big funeral?" asked Henry Iwitz. "No. Hubert Weldon lived like a hermit with his sister, and after she died he went to pieces. Only about 3 people were there and the undertakers. Henry asked if Mrs. Weldon came to the village. She does, mostly to the bank. She drives a blue Cortina and wears trousers and a sheepskin coat. Next morning Henry Iwitz went out early. He walked through the narrow streets with tiny shops resembling old engravings from Victorian times. He went round the village green and threw a handful of pennies to a cluster of children playing there. He asked the way to the undertaker's, and a small boy took him to the doorstep. The manager, Mr. Roberts, was very helpful. Yes, my firm did provide the last service for Mr. Hubert Weldon. He had lived such a quiet life. The first time I ever set my eyes on him was when I had to close the lid of his coffin. I would be extremely grateful if you could answer a question, Mr. Roberts. You see, a long time ago I lived with the Weldons at Fernhill Manor. When I heard of Hubert's death, I asked my solicitor to go to the funeral and put a Bible into his coffin. Unfortunately, he is abroad now and I could not ask him. Do you know if he was at the service? And most of all, did he put the Bible in the coffin? Mr. Roberts was sure that he was not at the funeral. There was only the widow and her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, himself and his men. The only person who put something in the coffin at the last moment was Mrs. Weldon. It was a white satin cushion. Next day Henry went to the bank, changed some traveler's checks, and sat at the writing desk sorting out some papers. Close to noon, Teresa Weldon entered the bank. He knew her immediately from the description given by the landlord of the Red Chimneys. From behind a newspaper he watched Hubert's widow, tilting her head with immaculate dusty blonde hair like a chrysanthemum in the wind, while talking to the cashier. Her voice was solid and melodic. As she left the bank, Henry Iwitz caught a full view of her face and eyes. From that moment he was certain that she had not buried Melissa's jewels with her husband. The remaining question was whether she had some agreement with the solicitor, who thus stayed away from the funeral, and his duty to see Melissa's wish carried out. He decided to take a gambler's chance. He telephoned Mrs. Weldon and asked her if he could come to see her. Obviously she refused, not knowing him. It concerns Miss Melissa Weldon's jewels, Henry told her bluntly. To avoid a big trouble and a scandal, Mrs. Weldon, I suggest that you should see me as soon as possible. In the early afternoon, Teresa Weldon received Henry Iwitz in the empty hall of Fernhill Manor. She was not prepared for someone as handsome and civilized as Henry Iwitz. For a fleeting moment, she considered that it might be wise to form some sort of association, even marriage with this old friend of Hubert, but it would mean sharing her money and everything. She reminded herself soberly and asked her visitor into the blue drawing-room. Before his arrival, she had removed the iron case from the rococo table and put it deep in the window seat. This room is one of 3 still furnished, Mrs. Weldon told Henry. The rest of the furniture was sold. I am going to the Seychelles to live shortly, so there is not much time left for us to complete our business, said Henry. I am puzzled, Mr. Iwitz. What business are you referring to? Mrs. Weldon asked. Henry braced himself, like a gambler throwing in the final dice. The 6 bracelets and the 6 rings, which you did not bury with your husband according to the last wish and will of his sister Melissa. You have buried her hands, apparently very damaged, tucked in a white satin cushion, but that is all. You prevented the solicitor from being present. How do you know all this? Asked Teresa Weldon, breathless. Henry Iwitz knew that he was gaining ground. Obviously, I've made a point of knowing. I suggest that we should share 50-53 rings and 3 bracelets each. You are insane, Teresa told him. On the contrary, very sane. This way you will retain half the loot. Should you refuse to share with me, the Weldon's tomb will be opened, and the solicitor and you will go to court. He will lose his license, and you will lose all the jewelry because the court will see to it that Melissa's wish is at last carried out. Teresa Weldon observed him calmly. She thought, he doesn't know that the house is fully equipped with electronic devices. As he means business, I must move fast. You don't give me much choice, do you, Mr. Iwitz? I am used to facing any situation and make quick decisions if the situation demands it. Of course, you would have to confirm to me in your own handwriting that you have received half of the jewelry. That way our guilt will be shared and we will both be safe. The jewels are in an iron box in the cellar. It is the safest place in the house. Shall we go there and you can make your choice? The thought of the dead butler in the Fernhill Manor cellar flashed through Henry's brain. He knew that in the next few moments it would be either him or Teresa Weldon. She had the advantage of knowing where all the electronic buttons were, but he was always extremely perceptive and quick in action. Teresa led the way across the empty hall. Their footsteps sounded like hammer blows. At the door to the cellar, Teresa stopped. This is an automatic door. It takes some moments to open it. She pressed 2 buttons on the frame and the metal door started slowly to slide to one side. Henry Iwitz was standing a short step behind Teresa. When the door stopped, she turned to him. "Let's go. Your treasure is within your grasp." For a fleeting moment, Henry looked close into her eyes, and she knew, with her heart pounding like a ship's bell in a storm, that she had met her match. Henry Iwitz closed his left arm tightly around her waist, and with his right hand pressed the electronic buttons. The metal door started to slide forward. Teresa's screams rang through the house, but there was nobody to hear. She fought with her nails and teeth, but the lean frame of Henry had the qualities of steel. With a precise timing, he pressed Teresa's body to the frame, and in a fraction of a dangerous moment let the thick metal sheet pin her to it. The high-power operated door did not stop at the obstacle. It went right through it. Because she was pinned to the frame facing the cellar, the half of her body with her face fell inside, the other, with the back of her head, dropped to Henry's feet. Her brain spattered on his shoes. Her shattered arms shot up and down in macabre spasms. Her blood ran in a dark, sickly-smelling stream. Henry knew that he must act quickly. Thanks to the old butler, Teresa Weldon's death would also seem an electronic accident. He stepped over her body, through the blood. In the hall, he took off his shoes and went to the blue drawing room. He was sure that the jewels were there. He opened the window seat. Inside was the iron case. The last task was to find the key. He looked around, trying to guess where a woman would hide an important item. At this moment, a man entered the room. He was about 40 years old, short, stocky, with short, wiry reddish hair, dressed in a loud checked tweed suit. "Hello, I am Charles Moore," he said. Startled, Henry Iwitz formally told him his name. "I've had the same idea about the cellar door, a ghastly accident," Charles Moore told Henry. "It seems that you have done that very unpleasant job for me. I know where the keys are. Shall we share 50-53 rings and 3 bracelets each?"